So Marion and I last night were setting out our courses, angles, how we're going to approach our exit from Florida to the Bahamas, and it made me realize that this would be a pretty good moment to tell everyone what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the decisions we make in terms of where we go, why we go. So I have a whiteboard. It's not Wednesday, but I'm thinking of starting my whiteboard Wednesdays, which may or may not include a whiteboard. They may or may not be done on a Wednesday, but for now, Whiteboard Wednesday is what it is. So, we have a map. Believe it or not, this is a map. So we have Florida here, Miami, as everyone knows. We are the Keys down here, so around Key Largo, about there. This is ocean. And these are Bahamas. So the Bahamas are made up of hundreds of islands, of which the one we are going to is this little speck right there. And that's a chain of islands called the Berry Islands, and the Bimini Islands, and we are going to be heading for a little key called Gun Key, which ideally is 50 nautical miles basically due east of Miami. So I've had a lot of people asking me, why haven't we already made the jump to the Bahamas from Florida? Well, actually one person's asked me. They asked me why we haven't already made the jump to Florida. So, to the Bahamas. So, therein lies a teachable moment. So when we're planning to sail from one destination to another, we have to take into account three factors. One is wind, the other is waves, and the third is current. So let's start with wind. So a lot of you on the west coast, some of you on the east coast, realize that the fronts in the US on the east coast tend to head south from the north. As we all know, there is wind associated with fronts. So the strength of the wind is affected by isobars, the closer the isobars, pressure. The closer they are, when you have a look on a weather map, the higher the wind is. So first thing we have to take into consideration is fronts coming down the Florida coast. But we have a second impact on the Caribbean, which is, let me use a different color here. So this is wind from the fronts coming down. We also have what are called the trade winds. And the trade winds start off the coast of Africa and they head east all the way across the Atlantic and they hit the Caribbean. The impact on the Bahamas, because it's fairly north, is not as great, but it still has an impact. So most of the prevailing wind that affects this area tends to be from the north or the east. So bear that in mind as we keep going. The second impact we have to be aware of are waves. So as you all know, but it bears repeating, there are three types of waves. There's swell, which are waves which are the remnants of storms. So you can be out at sea and beautiful calm day, and have the swell, which are these huge long period waves that you rise up and down on. That's basically swell. The second is wind waves, which are waves generated by the wind. So if you are on this side of an island and the island's protecting you and there's a strong wind from the east, then the waves are going to be fairly small because what's called the fetch is fairly short. So the waves are not too tall, too heavy to deal with in terms of a sailing boat. However, if you've got a long fetch, which those waves have been generated by the wind and they have blown over 2,000 miles, those waves are going to be a lot taller. And the third are what you call ripples, which are very localized winds, which we all see around the boats, around docks, and they have, from a sailing standpoint, we can ignore them. So what components are there to the waves that affect our decision to go from Florida to the Bahamas? So you have, with waves, you have the fetch, which we've talked about, which is the effect of distance they've had to grow. But the main things we're interested in is the height of a wave. So here's a wave, so the height. But in this case, what is even more important is what's called the period. So you have a 4-foot wave, and the period is the length of time between the passing of the peak of the wave. So if you have a 4-foot wave and the period is 30 seconds, you're not going to feel that. However, if that period, the difference in time is 4 seconds, that's going to be a lot stronger wave, and it's going to have a lot more impact on the boat. You're going to be rolling either sideways or yawing. So period is very important here. And that comes into consideration from the decision we make as to when to leave. We look at the height of the waves, we look at the period of the waves. So you could have a 40-foot wave, which scares the heck out of any sailor. But if you're out in the middle of the ocean and the period is 30 seconds, you're not going to feel it. You're going to have a beautiful rolly ride, which is what we're looking for. So that's waves. Now the third and most critical for us in this situation is current. So everyone's heard of the jet stream, which is a body of air which is traveling very fast at a very high altitude, and it affects the weather. In the sea, there are equivalent currents, and we won't go into too much depth about it, but they're basically currents which are based upon changes in temperature, which cause changes in density, and there are a multitude of currents that occur within the ocean, some on the surface, some thousands of feet deep. However, the one which we are most concerned about is the mother, for us, of all currents, which is the Gulf Stream. So the Gulf Stream is this huge body of water that starts in the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea, and moves up the east coast of the United States. So close to shore, it is fairly minimal. It starts at about 3 miles offshore. In the middle, it's very strong. So what are we talking about? It's modeled, and there are forecasts, but it can be up to 4 to 5 knots speed. Now, that doesn't sound a lot, right? But considering our cruising speed is 6 knots, if we were sailing into it at 6 knots, and in the middle of the Gulf Stream it was coming from the south to the north at 5 knots, we'd be making 1 knot of progress. That's with the wind behind us. So the Gulf Stream is incredibly impactful on decisions that we make. Now, I've talked about wind, waves and current. How these all interact in terms of decisions we make to sail from Florida to the Bahamas is shown exactly by these 2 arrows. So if the wind is from the north and the current is from the south, you basically end up with wind generated waves heading south and current heading north, which stops those waves from moving as fast as they would normally move without going against the current. So you get waves like that. And that's no-brainer for us. You cannot physically sail through that. It's crushed souls, boats. So we have to wait for this incredible moment that doesn't occur very often, where you have winds that do not come from the north, do not come from the east, but they come from south of 90 degrees. So they can be from the southeast, they can be from the south, they can be from the southwest. But they also need to be fairly low. So you are ideally looking for winds up to about 15 knots. Anything over there, it again becomes problematic. So we spend a heck of a lot of time watching the weather, because as fronts move through, due to being in the northern hemisphere, the winds clock and they veer clockwise. So as they pass, the wind starts to move from north to east, and then to south, southwest, and then clock back around. But these moments here, where they are coming from a southerly component, don't occur very often, and it has been probably in the last 4 weeks, front after front after front coming down, which has stopped anyone from really sailing in anything other than comfortable conditions from Florida to the Bahamas. So that's one of the things which we have to take into consideration. Now, the last thing is the fact that we have sailed south from Miami to Key Largo to go back. So why have we done that? And that comes down to a decision. So as I was saying before, I was rudely interrupted by a dead battery. When you're going to record, check your battery before you start recording. So decision that we have to make as to why we sailed down to Key Largo to then sail back north, because right here it would make sense for the 50 nautical miles from Miami, whereas this is approximately 76 nautical miles. So, as you know, there is this current which explained called the Gulf Stream. So how do we then calculate how we're going to get there? Because this straight direct route, which is called the Rum Line, is 76 nautical miles. So where we have here is we are, as from a latitude standpoint, 25 degrees 4 minutes. Where we're going to is called Gun Key, and it's 25 degrees 34 minutes. For you mariners, 1 degree of latitude is 60 miles. Therefore you can see that what we have here, and I'm going to do this as start again down here, is we have a triangle, and this is 30 nautical miles, 04 to 34 minutes, 30 nautical miles. We know this is 76, so we can start doing some right angle triangles and figuring out where we've got to the angle. However, there are two things called set and drift, which is the impact of the current. So we know we are going to be pushed north at approximately, the Gulf Stream changes, but you can estimate it at 2.5 knots, sorry. Which means for every hour we sail, we're going to be pushed north 2.5 miles, 2.5 nautical miles. So what we have is a calculation. We average 6 knots, but for this exercise, Mary and I have been looking at calculations 6 knots, 7 knots, 8 knots, because we will have the Gulf Stream helping us. So what we've decided on is an average of 7 knots. So, simply put, 7 knots, if there was no current, to sail 76 nautical miles. This is not going to be accurate for the sake of this. We've done the calculations, so anyone is going to be able to shoot holes in my calculations here. But on average, you're going to look at about 11 hours to cover. That's 76 nautical miles. So, if we sail for 11 hours, the Gulf Stream is going to push us north 2.5 times 11, 27.5 nautical miles north. Well, we're going 30 miles north. So, we know if we aimed 90 degrees and did nothing else and sailed at 7 knots, we would end up 30 minus 27.5, 2.5 miles south of our destination. So what we then do is we start to do calculations on the charts as to adjusting the angle. Now this is good, and this is why we're starting south to go north. Because of the Gulf Stream, which heads north, we have this wonderful craft called a catamaran. Now, if you've got current and you are aimed into that current, it is going to slow you down exponentially. So the last thing we want to do is to be aimed into the current and crabbing, sailing our way across. So the goal is to come up with an angle of sail that's our catamaran. The nose of the catamaran is actually below 90 degrees, so you get a lift from the current. Hence, we sailed south to go north. If we had tried to sail straight across, we would be crabbing, and that journey would not only be really uncomfortable, but it would also take twice as long because the Gulf Stream would be slowing us down. So the calculation we have made is we need to aim the catamaran on a constant heading of about 84 degrees. It's going to vary between 83, 86 degrees, but it's the way we've calculated it. We can calculate that we will aim the catamaran the whole time at 84 degrees. So what you end up having is a little drawing like this. So we are here, we want to go up here, we will aim at an angle of approximately 84 degrees, and we will maintain that. And what will happen is we will slowly be pushed north by the Gulf Stream and hopefully end up at Gun Key, which is the first port of call in the Bahamas. So you can see with all of the different dynamics, it's not as easy as just saying, oh, we need to sail 50 miles, which is what anyone from Napa to San Francisco is a 45-minute trip. This is going to take us 11 hours, and there's a lot of calculations involved with deciding when to do it. So I hope I haven't put you all to sleep, but as you can see, we had a lot of calculations going on last night, and we are hoping that in the next 5 days there is a weather window which is opening up that will allow us to sail across to the Bahamas in a fairly comfortable manner, and hopefully the next time we post something we will be in the beautiful Bahamian Islands.